Triple Crown here, Saturday, April 20th, 2024. First intermission is over and we're back onto what is normally the ice. In this case today, it is the concrete because in this little hockey arena is day 2 of the Strongsville card show. If you haven't seen the day 1 vlog, go check that out. The goal today is to try to take some bigger swings at some larger, both vintage and modern cards I saw on day 1. But before we get to that, I have some unfinished business to attend to with a card that has piqued my interest. Let's take a look. Not exactly where I thought I'd be starting out the day, but there is a purpose to it. I'm at these value boxes that weren't here yesterday. I know this dealer pretty well. They are located up in Northeast Ohio, actually run a show of their own. I find a cool little gem there, which is the Travis Kelce Aqueous Test, Donruss image variation. And then that Pat McAfee card is kind of cool. I put it to the side temporarily, end up putting it back. But why am I back at this table specifically? Well, there is a card over to the showcase on the right that you'll see in a moment that I have been targeting for my set. In all places that I would find a card for either the Blue Ice or the Blue Refractor set, Strongsville is probably towards the bottom of that, but sure enough, there is one of the cards I need for my set there. And the only problem is, at least for me, it's in a PSA 10 holder. Now I'm going for the set raw. Ideally, I want these cards to put in my binder. Thus far, I've acquired over 200 of the 220 cards I need for the Blue Refractors, and I have just recently bought the first one that was graded. I ended up cracking it out because it was a 9, but it wouldn't make much sense for me to crack out a PSA 10, especially if I'm going to have to pay a PSA 10 price. Why not just keep it in a 10? Now, I do have some options here. What I could do is I could buy the card, and eventually, when I get a raw copy, I can sell the PSA 10, especially if I think it's at a really good price. The last one had sold at $300 after this particular player's very hot start to 2024, and they have it at $250. So there is that opportunity there. Maybe I just buy it for my own inventory, but I really don't know how I feel about that. And I thought about it overnight. I decided if I can get a number that is too good to pass up, I'm going to buy the PSA 10. What I'll do is I'll print out a photo of the slab and stick it in my binder as a substitute and keep the card in a special box instead. And while I flip through these cards, I'm thinking about it, contemplating all the different scenarios. I'm going to see what else I could potentially take over with me. I do find one other card. It's a really cool Ozzie Newsome tie-dye auto. I'm hoping that that little stack is going to be enough to push the number down on the Volpe to what I like to call a Godfather price, meaning a price I can't refuse. Let's see how we fare on this.
I was trying to ask your dad, but I think the show is done at 4 tomorrow. You know.
I took these two with the Volpe. Could you do 250?
Probably wouldn't do that.
What'd you want to be?
I mean, I'm going to be firm at 250 on that. So 55, like 280.
280. 280 is an extremely fair price, which lends to this being one of the more difficult card decisions I have made in some time. Yes, I need this card for my set. Yes, it's one of the biggest ones I still need for my set. And yes, it is incredibly tempting, especially when it is right there in front of your face. There's no waiting for shipping. There's no waiting for an auction to end. It's yes or no, and a simple pulling out the cash and laying it on the table is enough to take the card home with me. But ultimately, I have to show some restraint here and pass on the Volpe. I do get the 2 value box cards, which I am pleased with. I'm very happy with those 2 cards. But I told myself from the very beginning, building the Blue Refractor set, I would only buy a PSA 10 if it was too good of a deal to pass up, or I really had no other options. And thankfully for me, Volpe being one of the hottest rookies means that there will be people listing that card for quite some time. It's not one of those that people will be disincentivized from trying to sell, especially if he keeps playing the way that he did. I'd be happy with buying an 8 or a 9 and cracking that out, but it would make no sense to buy a 10 and crack it out. And really, I don't need to buy a 10 when I know that I could buy a raw and then hopefully use the extra money from buying raw versus a 10 to get another one of the big names on the set, perhaps a Gunnar Henderson, perhaps a Corbin Carroll. And even the dealer as such was telling me that as much as he would like me to buy the card, I got to buy what I like. And he was absolutely right. I appreciate him being cool about it and talking through it with me. He could probably tell that I was really struggling with the decision. But yeah, sometimes you got to show some restraint at this show. I thought that this was a neat little clip to include, but ended up paying $40 for the Newsom and the Kelsey. So I'm pleased with that. At least I got a few cards to start the day early on. And proud of myself for sticking to my guns and going for what I was looking for on the Volpe.
250.
Do you guys have
Wait, is this
both
trading?
Canadian?
I was about ready to another one.
Because I had a guy come in and ask me.
Is there anything kind of like that in that stack underneath there? Is it kind of just a hodgepodge of
That's a
everything?
sharp printing like that, right? Next thing.
All right, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I'm looking up right now. But the only modern ones you can shoot certain through.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, man. Wow.
How much does he have on this one?
Sir.
I think I know. There might be one.
250 on this one?
That knows more about those 62 shells.
How much is this one?
That's kind of marks up.
This one's 100. There we go.
This was a dealer who I talked with a little bit on day one. Didn't record it, but he had some nicer ultra modern stuff mixed in with his vintage. And I gotta say, I was a little perplexed because he had told me as I was walking away on day one that we could talk on some stuff, see if we could work something out. But then when I was asking about the individual cards, he seemed to imply that he didn't have much room on them. But I decided to come back nonetheless since it looked like he brought a lot of more stuff with him. None of those value boxes were there on day one. And ultimately, I just couldn't get my foot in the door with any of these cards in terms of negotiations. You see the Jackie there. All-time high sale on that card was $102. Paying about 2.5 times the all-time high on it just wouldn't make a ton of sense. And then the quad relic, a little bit closer on that one. Some of the nicer ones that I've seen sell really since the product was released back in 2013 were around $80, but that's typically with patches. Again, the Jackie is a bat card, and I'd prefer a Jersey relic if I'm going to pay that much on a Jackie card, just because a Jersey is a little bit more personal than a bat relic for my taste. And then he had some nicer Ellie De La Cruz autographs, being that I'm from Cincinnati. To get those while I'm out of market and bring them back into market would be something that's appealing to me. In particular, he had this one PSA 10 Speckle auto. I asked him what he had on it. He told me $2,500, and he told me yesterday that he thought that that might be a steal at that price. Here are the sales history on it, and I don't know when the last time these were $2,500 were. I would suspect probably when he got called up that maybe they might have touched that, but it's been quite some time. He had told me that he was into a lot of this stuff for pretty high, and from what I could tell, he really didn't want to take a loss. So unfortunately, some of the bigger cards that I wanted to swing towards here were not going to work out, but there's still plenty of larger vintage cards I want to target at the show, but I figured it was at least worth a second look here on some of the nicer ultra modern stuff that I found in the room. Next card that I start looking at here is this 93 Finest Refractor Frank Thomas. Dealer has 1,600 on this one, and a couple of years ago, that's about the going rate for these. They have dipped a little bit since then. I'll show you some of the recent sales here on screen. But in the background, what I'm doing is a couple of things. Number one, I am looking over the card because it's an older cert, and number two, I am verifying the cert. On some of these older certs, I like to just verify that they are still in PSA system. They haven't been deactivated for whatever reason. Especially if I'm going to be spending at least $1,000 on a card, I want to make sure that everything checks out. It's not out of distrust for the dealer or anything. I'm just doing my basic homework that I would on any large purchase for anything. And then the second thing is that I want to check the condition on it. This one, I thought I saw something on one of the edges that I felt wouldn't necessarily lend the card to being a 9. This is actually the third time this has happened to me in the show where I was looking over a card and I thought the card might have received a bit of a generous grade, and this is by no means meant to be disrespectful to the dealer or their card. It's just me trying to make sure that I get the best bang for my buck and buy a card that I am happy with. ultimately, looking over this card, what I'm going to have to do here is try to get it in range of a more normal PSA 9 price, because I don't necessarily think that if you crack this card out and subbed it again today, let's say 10 times, that even 5 times it would come back a 9. I feel like this is closer to a 7 or an 8. I tell the dealer that I'm going to end up passing on it. He tells me where would I want to be at. I told him $10.50. That was probably the most that I was willing to pay given some of the sales history on it. He said his best was 14. It's not unreasonable. It'd be towards the higher end of the market, but it's just not right for me. I'll have to pass and take my chances elsewhere. But he was really cool about it. It was nice to talk to him about the card. And going to keep looking for that big purchase for the day.
What number is that?
59.
59.
You give me the exhibits when you're ready.
Yep. You want the graded ones?
Right before lunch, Mike and I stopped by Craig's table again, and peeking out from one of the showcases was one of the cards that I was targeting in terms of vintage at this show. It was a 53 Bowman Color Mantle. This one was number 1 on my list just because I feel like it's a card that is underappreciated and undervalued right now. As crazy as that may seem to say, people will be like, oh, Mantle undervalued? In my opinion, on some of these, yes. He had this one priced pretty fair. I end up passing on it only because there is a crease going across his face. For me on vintage, number 1 for me is centering, and number 2 is that if I have to get a card with creases, I want my example to not have any creases going through the face. The price wasn't a crazy steal. It was priced pretty fairly, but I looked at it with Mike, and it just wasn't the right copy for me. It was the closest I came to buying one at the show. Go back to some B-roll footage here to share some of my thoughts. The 53 Bowman Color Mantle was number 1 on my list for vintage cards. I was also looking at a 52 both Topps and Bowman Maze, as well as a 53 Topps Maze. But ultimately, I walk away empty-handed on those. There were some nice examples. Most of the ones I was looking at were 3s and 4s, which was towards the top of my tolerance in terms of price. But a lot of the 4s I felt like were priced at 6 range. And while some of the examples were really nice, and I don't expect dealers to be giving away these cards by any means, there's some beautiful cards and they've spent a lot of time acquiring a lot of these, they just weren't quite at a price point that I would have been happy with, and not close enough for me to start negotiating in some cases. But it was cool to just walk around and see a lot of this stuff. A lot of the dealers here are very passionate about their cards, and a lot of my friends here that I walked around with were very passionate, observing a lot of the cards, learning a lot about some of these sets that I was unfamiliar with. Was some of the most valuable takeaways I had from the show. Certainly something that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, you could always buy cards, but hanging out with friends and experiencing the community, especially at the get-together the previous night, was by far and away the highlight of the show. I did not walk away without getting something that was, a little nicer than some of what I had picked up earlier on. And that was this card that I'll flash on screen right here. It's a Phil Mickelson rookie auto. This was buried in a case underneath some Red Sox first Bowman autos that this dealer from the Boston area had. He was incredibly nice. I walked past his showcase a few times and asked to look through some of the stacks. Mike got a card for his 84 Donruss Hall of Famer run out of that as well. Worked out for all sides, but this show was a lot of fun. It's definitely a lot different than a lot of the shows you might see in my vlogs. It might not look like I made a lot of deals, and that's really because I didn't, but it was largely about the people and getting to hang out. I'll be back with some more regularly scheduled show vlog programming here in the coming weeks. But until then, take care, stay safe, be kind.